You are live, Chair Veros.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to City Policy Committee meeting of February 24th, 2021. I'm calling the meeting to order at 4 p.m. Madam Clerk, please go ahead and read meeting procedures.
Thank you, Chair Veros. The procedures adopted for this meeting meet or exceed the standards set forth in the Governor Gavin Newsom's Order N-25-20, which allows public meetings like this one to be held by way of teleconference to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. At this time, I will conduct roll call, and I would ask the chair to recognize me afterwards to confirm certain matters for the record. Chair, Councilmember Veros.
Yes.
Vice Chair, Councilmember Armstrong.
Here.
Thank you. Based on the responses to roll call, the record should reflect that all committee members can hear the proceedings clearly. If there are no objections, the record will further reflect that each committee member believes, based on the voice or facial recognition or otherwise, that the persons representing themselves to be council members are in fact council members. Seeing no objection, I will turn the meeting back over to the chair with a reminder that all votes must be taken by roll call.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Item number 2, public comment or written communication. At this time, members of the public are encouraged to address the policy committee on any item not already included in tonight's agenda. Members of the public who are participating via Zoom will have the opportunity to make comments to the policy committee live through the Zoom application. Comments should not exceed 3 minutes. No committee action can be taken at this meeting on issues raised during public comment, whether submitted by email or Zoom. To comment, please click raise your hand button or *9 on your telephone to request to speak. When it is your turn, you will be unmuted to make your comment for up to 3 minutes. After the allotted time, you will then be remuted. Written comments submitted were provided to the committee prior to the start of this meeting and made a part of the public record. Written public comment will no longer be read aloud during the meeting. Public comment is now open. Madam Clerk, any public comment, please?
So we have 2 participants that have raised their hands. And Christina is going to assist with the public comment.
The first public comment is from Patricia Boone.
Hi, Patricia.
Yes, I'm afraid I wish to speak on one item on the policy committee. I think this is probably not the time for me to make a comment. I will wait.
Thank you.
Okay.
The next request is from Jim Gibbon.
Can you hear me, see me, or just hear me?
Hi, Jim. We can hear you.
Oh, you can only hear me. Okay, all right. This is the first time that I've done a Zoom with you, so I'm not sure. I want to speak on 5.1. Will I have an opportunity to speak at 5.1 during the meeting?
Okay. So then you can wait till item 5.1 is open. So we'll again reopen for public comment for that item. Then you can come back and join us.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? I don't see anyone else. Okay. Thank you then. We'll go ahead, close the public comment. Item number 3, approval of minutes. Item 3.1, policy committee rescheduled meeting November 19, 2020, 4 p.m. And also I want to add item number 3.2, policy committee regular meeting December 16, 2020, 4 p.m. Vice Chair Armstrong, any feedback?
No, I'd like to move we approve item 3.1 and 3.2.
I second it.
Mr. Chairman, we do have a hand raised on, I don't know if that's regarding the minutes or if that's still regarding 5.1.
Oh, that is Patricia, right? So I
Yes,
see Patricia, she's for 5.1. That's what she said.
okay.
Thanks for checking. Okay, move the motion and I second it. Any further discussions? Nothing?
No,
Okay.
I didn't attend either meeting, but I'm familiar with the content and still would like to proceed with the approval of those minutes.
Thank you. So move and second, Madam Clerk, please vote or call for a roll call on vote.
Okay. Item number 3.1, policy committee meeting minutes of November 19th, 2020. Chair Veros,
Yes,
Vice Chair Armstrong.
Yes,
Thank you. Item number 3.2, for approval of policy committee minutes for December 16th, 2020. Chair Veros,
yes,
Vice Chair Councilmember Armstrong.
yes,
Thank you.
item number 4, unfinished business. There is nothing, so we can roll on to item 5, new business. Item 5.1, reconsideration of the recommendation to remove the structures at Crocanion Gardens. So do we have any presentations or any comments at this time?
Yes, I do have a verbal presentation for you if you would like me to proceed.
Please, Kathy, please proceed.
Absolutely. So good afternoon, Commissioner Veros and Commissioner Armstrong. I also, as you might have noticed, have Rod Wu, one of our engineers here to answer questions on this topic after I am done with my presentation. So just in order to get everybody back up to speed with where we are now, we're here this afternoon to talk about the structures located at Crocanion Gardens. And as you know, this particular issue has been a topic of discussion by the City Council, the Parks Commission, and the community, well, probably sooner or earlier than this, but at least since 2012. Crocanion Gardens is a very unique park because of its natural setting, its focus on gardening, and that beautiful access to San Ramon Creek. So people are passionate about the park and love it. So everyone's in agreement this is the most beautiful park and should be focused on nature. The city, via the master plan, conducted surveys, held workshops, prepared a Crocanion Gardens outreach report, which was eventually folded into the Parks, Trails, Open Space, and Recreation Master Plan, which, as you know, was adopted by the City Council in June of 2020. The master plan very specifically identifies Crocanion Gardens as a park in poor condition that improvements in the park should reflect the site's natural setting and connect with the landscape environment and adjacent creek and help maintain a serene environment where residents can connect and engage with nature. The Nature Park Foundation has proposed to raise funds to renovate MUDs and a portion of the park in exchange for the ability to offer classes and programs primarily run by volunteers, the ability to offer sponsorships and recognize sponsors on the park site, and priority for scheduling classes and events, and some dedicated office and storage space in the potentially renovated building. A presentation of the 3 separate assessments of the structures and the cost estimates for the renovation of the structures at Crocanion Gardens were completed by the Nature Park Foundation. They had a team that went in and took a look at the building, and that was attached in your packet. Bishop Branch, and as well as a city contractor. All of those different versions of how much it would cost to renovate MUDs were presented to the City Council in December of 2019. And again, that's the staff report and the information that was included in your packet. The renovations of the building at that time was estimated to cost approximately $4.3 million, depending on what attributes were included and the level of renovation that would be established. The Parks and Community Service Department was tasked with developing an MOU with the Nature Park Foundation to then be approved by the Parks Commission and ultimately by the City Council. The first step was to develop an MOU with the Nature Park Foundation, was simply to clarify the relationship, how the partnership would work, and of course with the caveat that approval of an MOU did not guarantee approval of the project, but it would be the very first step in how we could move forward together. To that end, the staff met 14 times with the president of the Nature Park Foundation, and unfortunately were unable to get to a document that was ready to be presented to the Parks Commission. There were several stumbling blocks. However, some of the primary challenges to the MOU were the proposed level of programming, interest by the foundation in running classes that were not necessarily nature oriented, and the desire of the foundation to have a higher level of decision-making in regards to the design and construction of the building. Now, generally, the foundation is seeking a higher level of access and control of the site than the city has granted to our existing city foundations that are supporting our other city facilities. That's not to say it's a good or a bad thing, but that is what the Nature Park Foundation proposed in their conversations with the Facilities Committee of the Parks Commission when we talked about the MOU. In order to establish an MOU, it became apparent that a final conceptual plan and programming plan for the park would really be beneficial to ensure that both the Nature Park Foundation and the city have a unified vision for the renovation of the park and associated structures. The Nature Park Foundation requested that the programming and conceptual plan elements be brought to the Commission for consideration and a recommendation prior to continuing with the MOU negotiation. This came to pass at one point in the negotiation when we were discussing, you know, if we were to move things around in the park. So I think I very specifically said, as an example, if we expanded the garden plots here and maybe we don't use the parking lot where it is, maybe we're going to change that back into natural space and move the parking. That was one of the points at which the Nature Park Foundation said, wait a minute, we have a very specific vision for the layout of the park and the park attributes. We have a very specific vision for how the building should be renovated and the types and frequency of classes and events on site, and really requested that we go back and take a look at this with the Parks Commission. So they also indicated, the foundation, that they would not necessarily be interested in fundraising for the renovation if the conceptual plan and programming levels were really not conducive to their vision. So the Parks Commission tasked the Facilities Subcommittee with doing kind of a deep dive into the issues related to Crocanion Gardens and then report back to the full commission. So the Facilities Committee took on the review of all of the past staff reports, plans, surveys, reports that had been related to Crocanion Gardens and the programming there. They reviewed all of the relevant data that had been gathered to date. They evaluated them in light of the park's master plan. And then they made a recommendation regarding a programming plan and conceptual plan elements for the park, including the structures. The Facilities Committee met on 6 different occasions, reviewed everything, and agreed that any programming or conceptual plan attributes for Crocanion Gardens should really be in line with the Parks, Trails, Open Space, and Recreation Master Plan. And they further stated that the vision for the park at that point, and the vision that they used to kind of guide their thinking and their thought process, was that anything on that park site should retain the peaceful atmosphere, serene environment, and emphasis on nature. They received presentations from the Nature Park Foundation on the Nature Park's vision for the park and the programming. They toured the site with the president of the Nature Park Foundation and a landscape designer from David Gates and Associates. They met with the city staff from the Public Works Department and reviewed both the annual and long-term cost projections for operation and maintenance of Crocanion Gardens and the associated structures. The financial comparison of 4 different scenarios related to renovation of the park and structures are in your packet, and those were requested by the Parks Commission Facilities Committee as they were trying to wrestle with what really were the cost differences as you looked at these different models, both with support of the Nature Park Foundation and without support of the Nature Park Foundation, and also trying to take a look at not just the immediate cost of building and maintaining the property, but also to take a look at what that is over 20 years and what kind of replacement costs might be considered. Now, I should say those are broad brush numbers. They are not very, very specific, but they should give you an indication. And finally, they received a presentation from the Nature Park Foundation on their desired level of programming and their preferred covenants of a potential MOU with the city. The committee, after many hours of careful study, discussion, consideration, made the recommendations to the Parks Commission that they adopt a vision for Crocanion Gardens that retains that peaceful atmosphere, serene environment, and emphasis on nature, that future classes, events, and programs at Crocanion Gardens should be focused on nature and the natural world and really be kept at low levels as determined by the Parks and Community Services Department to ensure that the peaceful, serene environment is maintained. And the third recommendation, the one that we're primarily discussing today, is that Crocanion Gardens should be renovated using the David Gates and Associates rendering as a starting point with the complete demolition of the buildings, adding a new pavilion shade structure, and the addition of a permanent restroom with a dedicated maintenance area for the park. The Parks Commission, as you know, endorsed all three of the recommendations, and they felt very strongly that the renovation of the park itself was more important and would have a greater impact on the community than renovation of the structures. They found that the renovation of the structures would be costly for both the Nature Park Foundation initially and the city long-term for maintenance. And really the park itself would have such a huge impact if it was improved for the whole community. Now, in order to make an investment of that magnitude, if you were to fix the building viable, the commission felt that the usage of the building would need to be maximized, which would result in naturally higher levels of usage. And that was their concern, that it would cause potential disruption of that peaceful atmosphere and serene environment. Rental events that could happen there would not necessarily focus on nature and would introduce larger groups of people and general activity in the park that didn't have anything to do with nature on a daily basis. So they made that recommendation to the City Council to support recommendation number 3. As you know, the City Council initially supported all 3 of the recommendations at their January 26th meeting. However, at the February 9th meeting, they voted to reconsider number 3, which is related specifically to the demolition of the buildings. The item before the Policy Committee today is reconsideration of the Parks Commission's recommendation 3, and that is that Crocanion Gardens should be renovated using the David Gates and Associates rendering as a starting point with complete demolitions of the building, adding the new shade structure, and with the addition of permanent restrooms and a dedicated maintenance area for the park. So at this point, staff is requesting direction from the Policy Committee on how to proceed with or modify recommendation number 3 in the context of the council's approval already of recommendation 1 and 2, which really identified and clarified the vision for Crocanion Gardens with that peaceful atmosphere, serene environment, and that the programming be kept at low levels. In looking at the potential alternatives you could consider, and by no means are you limited to these were just some of the thoughts right off the bat of what you could consider when you're thinking about just recommendation 3 is retaining some of the smaller structures, or you could support renovating a portion of the mud building or even all of the structures. There are the caretaker cottage and the greenhouses and the garages, those smaller places. So you have several different options that you could look at as you talk about recommendation 3. So basically, staff is seeking direction from the Policy Committee on how to proceed with or modify. And that concludes my report. I have lots of information, and of course, Rod and I are both here and can answer questions.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you. At this point, I'll open public comment. Public comment is open now. Madam Clerk, anybody for public comment?
Chair Veros, we do have members of the public that are wishing to speak.
Please promote them to our call.
Our first speaker is Jim Gibbons.
Yeah, just to make sure for the public comment, on this item is 3 minutes or less per person. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jim Gibbon. Thank you for allowing me to talk to you. I think that 3 minutes is ridiculous because I'm probably the prime mover in getting it back in front of you. San Ramon has very few historic places. It has no mechanism for studying its history, and like most other cities. The Mud's Restaurant, which was built in 1980, was a product of a synthesis and gathering of thought on technology, on openness, nature, and was a product of 10 years during the 60s of back to nature causes by people in California. It started for me in 1974 when I graduated from UC Berkeley Architectural School, the same school that the architect for this project, who has a doctorate in architecture from Berkeley, was contacted by Virginia Mudd to create a unique blend of technology, which was very young and only basically thought of as a theory of how to make a building more efficient. And her goal of culinary excellence and trying to blend together through the building of a restaurant as a mechanism for a demonstration project that needed space. They went in different areas. San Ramon was not a city at the time, but Bishop Ranch was just getting started. Twin Creeks was under development, and this property came available. It's ideal for its natural beauty. The objective was to demonstrate that
Mr. Gibbon, sorry to interrupt, but your 3 minutes is over. So, but please wrap up. I'll give a quick few seconds to wrap up.
Well, let me ask you a question. Have you seen my documentation that I sent you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Did you read it? It tells the story. It tells the history of this site and how it
That's right.
originally was part of the founding families in this community, and that this building is the product.
Sorry for interrupting. Thank you very much, because I need to be fair to everyone.
Okay. All right.
Madam Clerk, next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Jim Blickenstaff.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Blickenstaff, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I want to first point out an obvious fact that, for me anyway, that the Mud's Restaurant building itself has become an iconic structure, ahead of its time in terms of trying to be in harmony with nature and respect nature. It gives you a sense of what this park is about. If you don't have the Mud's Restaurant itself, just the building, I'm just talking about that single restaurant building, you don't have the premise that led to the gardens. You don't have the first stage that led to the park we have today. So it's a key component of this whole recent history of San Ramon that is very valuable in terms of that history. And it can be preserved in a way that enhances our history while not anyway distracting from the park. In fact, it'll enhance the park if preserved correctly. So I see it as a key ingredient of that park that respects the history of San Ramon, and also the fact that this location, this park, is very unique to San Ramon, and we ought to respect the history on that. So my thought is that the first step you have to do is take the necessary steps to preserve the main building. That's the first step. You have 2 or 3 choices here that are kind of crudely overestimating total cost of renovation and making it more an activity center, and all that's packaged together in a prohibitive cost. But that's not the cost I'm looking at. I'm looking at preserving it as a passive structure for the indefinite future as your first step. If you still see other steps that are worth looking at after that, you can expand on that. But that's your first key step. And I say passive because that's a key component of this structure. It represents that starting point that led to what we have today. And that's the historic component of it. So I'd say that's how you look at it. I think you need more review of this. You probably need a task force to get into details of preservation over total renovation, because I also tend to agree that too much activity there in MUDs would be appropriate for what that park represents. And MUDs, if preserved correctly, can really be an integral component of that history. And I think that's why it's so important. Just because it's recent history doesn't mean it's not as important of history that's 200 years old. So I'd say let's look at that. And like I said, if we need more improvements, we can do that later. But in terms of cost, demolition of this building could actually end up costing more than just that preservation aspect. So I think we have to really dig down on those details to make sure we make the wise decision at this point. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Franet Armstrong.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Franet. Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. I have already responded to some of the things that I disagree with in Kathy's report and statements, so I won't do it here. I do think that the building is historic. There's no doubt about that. But if we try to preserve it, we're going to have to do much of the same things to it, including ADA upgrades to the outside that we would have to do to renovate it. You're going to have to demo the fireside building because it's going to be dangerous because of the way it's falling into the creek. You're going to have parking if you're going to have people going over to it. And the beauty of the building is really on the inside. So to fix that up so that people can safely go in and ADA access is going to cost about the same as a good part of the renovation. The picnic area that is cited is already there. It has a natural shade structure called trees. And we see that people use it all the time. There's no need to cover virgin ground with concrete or rip down muds in order to have a picnic area. It's going to bring in a lot of people, and those people are going to need parking. With a nature center, we can offer classes and hands-on learning year-round, tying the gardens and nature in the park to people's daily lives, emphasizing health and respect for the environment. MUDs is part of the natural environment. While man-made, as Jim pointed out, it is really why so much of what is in the park is there. And it has a wonderful place in San Ramon's history. I think that I did want to mention that in case you looked at it, my renovation cost projections have an error in the spreadsheet. And if we're going to talk about that, I'd like to share my screen and show you where it is. I just grabbed a number from the wrong line. And that's all I'll have to say right now. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Abram Wilson.
Oh, hi, Mayor Wilson. Can you speak? Are you there?
I think we need to bring Abram into the meeting. I don't see him here, so can you bring him in?
Yeah, you need to bring them on this call.
It still does not appear he's in the meeting, so he can't be
Yeah.
heard.
I think
Yes,
now-
it's
yeah.
referencing
There he
his
is.
version of Zoom, so I can promote him to.
He's in now.
Yeah,
All right, there we
now,
go.
yeah. You need to unmute.
Muted now. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. First, would like to congratulate the two council members for being appointed to the committee and welcome them into the fold. Secondly, when we purchased the property itself, an integral part of the property itself and the total ambience was the building as well as the ground. They were in tandem as far as having that serenity. And I think that it brings everything together. When we looked at David Gates and the foundation went to David Gates, understanding the entire concept of the master plan and making sure it had that tranquility and all those feelings. When we spoke to David, when I spoke initially to David and working with Mrs. Armstrong, understanding and looking at the master plan and basically saying, how do we keep the building and how do we work it together? I think the buildings are an integral part. It will add to possibly the bringing revenue to the city, and it will not take away from the serenity. It will actually enhance. And once you tear something down, and with Sacramento, it's almost impossible to build it back again without costing 10 times the amount. I would hope that you would consider keeping this building and keeping the serenity and the master plan all working together. This could be a win-win for everyone. Thank you. And hopefully later on, we'll be available to answer any questions. So this is a conversation if you have. This is such an important, I think, event now to keep this building. Please, we will keep the comments very brief, but so that you have a really good understanding about the importance of keeping this all together. Again, thank you for the staff and congratulations. Thank you.
Yo. Okay. Any more speakers?
Chair Veros, at this time, I show no other request to speak.
Oh, thank you. Then we go ahead and close the public comment.
Chair Veros, I apologize. I do have another comment.
Oh, okay.
Request
I'll
from
open it back.
Patricia Boone.
Okay. I'll open the public comment again.
Yes, this is Patricia Boom. Thank you. I am still learning how to handle the hand up or down, so bear with me. I'm a 49-year resident of San Ramon. I actually worked with Virginia Mudd when she was designing the building and working with the gardens and setting up the gardens for the programs that she wanted to do with her restaurant. I've been following this process for a long time, and I think it needs to be simplified. Why don't you pattern it similar to what the San Ramon Historic Foundation is doing? we have a number of buildings on the property at Forestone Farms, and the foundation wants to restore the buildings. In the memorandum of understanding, there are several days that are given to the foundation for events that are fundraising. And that fundraising then comes back to the city for a variety of things, for programs, for restoring the buildings, for a number of other items on the site. Keeping the building, once it's gone, it's gone. And as much as you want to tear it down and think that it's going to provide the quietness for that park, once that building is gone, it's gone. Think about it seriously. In the memorandum of understanding for the Nature Park Foundation, they can have several days where they will do classes and events, and they can bring in money, and they can do the nature classes that they want to do. And then on the other days, the city can program classes or program for what they want, similar to what the Historic Foundation is doing. So consider that, simplify the whole process, and consider doing something like that while maintaining the building, because they are fundraising to preserve that building. So take that under consideration, and thank you very much.
Madam Clerk, anybody for like any more public comments?
At this time, I show no additional requests to speak.
Thank you. Then we go ahead and close the public comment. Vice Chair Armstrong, any questions to staff?
Not a question at this time, but I do want to make a couple comments, because going back to what Kathy Hyman said earlier, the comments that I took in from the last city council meeting where we discussed this, for what the policy committee was supposed to reconsider, it really only pertained to recommendation number 3. I think she made that clear tonight. And that was originally approved by the city council on January 26th. So recommendation 1 and recommendation 2 are not really up for reconsideration. And, that was, I think we all agreed with recommendation 1. That was the adoptive vision for Crocanion Gardens that retains the peaceful atmosphere, serene environment, and emphasis on nature. And then recommendation 2 had to do with accepting the recommendation for future classes, events, programs at Crocanion Gardens should be focused on nature and the natural world and be kept at low levels as determined by the Parks and Community Services Department to ensure that the peaceful, serene environment is maintained. So, and I think when we voted, we modified that a little bit to include a role for the Parks and Community Services Commission in recommendation 2. But with respect to recommendation 3 that we're considering now, or I'll just go back, recommendation 2 is kind of key because it talks about the low levels of programming. And so what we need to consider today is whether there's a place for any of the MUD's restaurant spaces to be available in accomplishing those recommendations number 1 and 2 that we already agreed are done and we voted on. So, and my understanding from listening to staff and to listening to commissioners is that the outbuildings are generally okay to keep. And I took a tour recently, last week, with Public Works of the site. Also walked the grounds with the president of the Nature Park Foundation, Ms. Armstrong. And so those outbuildings such as the caretaker cottage, the greenhouse, the garage, and those storage rooms, and maybe even potentially that shed, storage shed that I think it might have been used at one time as a wine storage room. But those are potentially within the intent of certainly saving those. So even though recommendation 3 talked about demolition of all the buildings, I think what we're really talking about here is whether or not the Muds restaurant will be demolished. And then in all discussions previously, to include what we heard from Franet this evening, it doesn't seem economically prudent to save the fireside room just due to its proximity to the creek and the cost it would take to kind of shore that up. So that the fireside room is not part of the discussion. It's really just the Muds facility, the restaurant. And I think what I heard from the council members, and I'm kind of going back looking at my notes here, looking at, how might we reuse the building or consider the historical aspect of it, reconsider demolishing the buildings. There was an issue that it was felt that the Nature Park Foundation was not given ample opportunity to be heard before the full council. And that was brought up at our last meeting. Should there be a presentation to the council? I think that's what we need to be talking about today as well. So I guess kind of having said all that, I have some more things I want to say, but at this time, I don't have any specific questions for the staff. So I want to kind of go back to you, Chair Veros, but I'd like to reserve some comments towards the end, and maybe we can talk through some direction or some guidance for the staff as we get towards the conclusion of this meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks for your comments. And okay, as we all agree that one thing about this structure that was created by some pioneers with the table to farm, and there is definitely a part of history to it, and maybe not the old history, but connected to the not just about restaurant, but towards the table to farm, and that kind of history is definitely there. And I thank to our Parks and Community Services Department as well as Nature Park Foundation. They tried their best to create this MOU. Just to give you some guideline, like a timeline for the reference, this on October 10, 2018, Parks Commission created a Nature Park Foundation proposal, which is also there within this documentation. This is nothing new. And then on December 2019, right? So that's almost more than a year. That's when our city council said that, okay, Nature Park Foundation, you get next 120 days. Next 120 days from December was roughly around April 10th, 2020. That's when they were supposed to establish MOU. And then on April 10th, 2021, that's when all the required $4 million that were supposed to be showed up within their finances to fix this structure, right? So that's how this whole thing went. I just wanted to give you some timeline on that. But looks like there was no MOU established and between Nature Park Foundation and the city. And also it is already overdue. It's like now it is coming to close to 1 year where we are supposed to see the funds. So that's, it looks like we are not close to any of that. So coming back to what the council is looking at, right? As they already mentioned, like recommendation A, B, I don't want to repeat all that, but then the only recommendation at this point that we need to look at is whether we should reconsider this to keep this structure. Now, one thing always, whenever we are coupling this whole Nature Park Foundation and the Mertz restaurant and the city of San Ramon, all these pieces, That's confusing everyone. And I think it's even confusing, the coupling all these things together, making it more confusing, more distracting and all that. So I think we need to take a step back here. Let's take a step back here. Let's decouple it at this point. Now, we as a city want to preserve this. Let's say if we want to preserve this structure. So Rod, I see that there was an estimate of $4.5 million or $4.3 million. Now that structure includes the main building, the fireside building, and all other pieces, right? Did we any time looked at the option of renovating not as a whole building, but whatever the minimum structure that we can preserve? Did we ever looked at that option?
Well, if we go back and look at kind of the reason why we were looking at the costs was a kind of a peer review of what the MUDS team wanted to do. And so we were kind of just commenting on that and providing cost estimates of what, you know, we felt that they wanted to do, what the cost would be to just rebuild an exactly a new facility or just to demo it. So no, we didn't consider kind of piecemealing or doing cost estimates for one building or a smaller size structure or anything like that at that point.
Sounds good. Thank you. So now we pretty much everyone agree that this is definitely a landmark. As I already mentioned, even the speakers on the call, they mentioned that we consider this as a landmark or historical structure for ourselves, so that we want to preserve. It doesn't mean that everything need to be preserved. So let's say, for example, if we can preserve a structure as a landmark, so that we can, not only for our generation, but future generation, they can claim that as this is a place where the farm to table, that nature, like nature park, as well as bringing the whole idea of climate control, all that related to building structure, that was brought into this whole, at that time, this whole thing was like a breakthrough technology and whatever they did. So my take on this one is, let's decouple this Nature Park Foundation and funding and all that. I think as a city, let's see if we can preserve any key part of this structure. That structure, like as we heard in city council meeting, that may not be like, that may not be in use, right? It can be a passive structure where we just keep that structure and clean up anything that is, like, for example, if fireside room, if that is not a feasible thing, just remove it, clean it up, and clean up all that around it at feasible price, or whatever the minimum price that we can do it at cost effective, I should say, not minimum, but at cost effective. With the cost effective, if we can do that, let's do that. And any organizations, like whether it's the Nature Park Foundation or any other organizations, they want to utilize the park as such, they can go through with our parks and community services guidance that recommended and approved by city council. And also we should welcome, if any organization, individual, anybody should be able to chip in, want to donate their contributions, that's fantastic, let them contribute. But then I want to make sure that this structure will be renovated, or if possible, whatever the we need to get the city council approval on that. In any case, that piece need to be part of the city, and city need to do that or take care of it. I don't think we need to go with any MOUs in this case, and we should let any party, like pretty much like any users that use our parks or any of our facilities, right? They should be able to utilize it within the parameters of our city parks and community services commission, parks and community services guidelines. So that's what I'm thinking, Vice Chair Armstrong. I would like to definitely have a little more conversation on this. So,
yeah, I mean, I've got some recommendations here, and a couple of things that you said. I think I've incorporated into some of these recommendations. I guess I did have a question maybe for Rod or for Kathy here, but did we do a fiscal analysis of just forget Mud's building right now, the restaurant building, but just for the kind of fixing up the outbuildings and maybe that storage shed, or even converting that storage room, that bigger storage room that I think I referred to as maybe the old wine cellar or something, converting that into the restroom instead of a prefab restroom or something like that. Have we done just an analysis on the non-MUDS restaurant facilities on that site?
Now, Rod, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we did that specific analysis. We have looked at some of those structures, and like as the garages are currently being used and some of those pieces are usable, but we have not done a financial analysis to my knowledge.
Okay. All right. Well, so Chair Rose, here's a couple things what I'd like to see going forward. I would like to see the staff coordinate with the Nature Park Foundation for an opportunity to be heard before the full council. They said that they were not given ample opportunity to speak at the last meeting that we had, where we voted on the January 26th. And I'd like the staff to work out a time and kind of the format to do that. I think previously you'd been talking about 6 minutes and a PowerPoint presentation, something to that nature. And I'd like to see that come back to the council. Also, everything else that can't fit into that, say 6 minutes, can be in a read ahead materials. And also in the next staff report for the council, I'd like to see these potential alternatives that you've listed in your staff report today, Kathy, the potential alternatives to recommendation 3, kind of presented before the council as well. Now, I don't believe that the third recommendation is consistent with what the city council has already approved on January 26th because of recommendations 1 and 2 and the low level of programming. However, the council asked us to take a look at different options for saving some or all of the MUDS building. And so that certainly is one of those options that is there. I'd also like to see a fiscal analysis, kind of to the question I just asked a minute ago. What would it cost to renovate those outbuildings to include the cost to convert that storage building into the restroom? I think that was also one of the Nature Park Foundation's ideas, was to take that building and convert it into a restroom. That seems to make sense to me. I see no need to get rid of all those other outbuildings. They definitely have a place, I think, in the future of Crocanion Gardens, regardless. And then, as Chair Veros was saying a moment ago, I'd also like to see some kind of a fiscal analysis of retaining a small portion of MUDS. Okay, we've talked about tearing everything down. We've talked about keeping everything, but what if we keep, whether it's for a practical purpose, such as a classroom or a conference room, or whether it's for a historical purpose, but keeping a single room and let the Nature Park Foundation prioritize which room it might be, but such as the banquet room or the reception hall or the south room or the lounge. I personally don't see a place for the indoor kitchen or multiple classrooms and conference rooms, because I don't think that would be consistent with recommendations 1 and 2. I think it drives too high a level of programming. But if there were to be a room to, again, from either a historical perspective or for indoor classes or something like that, what would it cost for a single room to be preserved. And then regarding the historical nature of the site, I'd like to look into, we heard Mr. Jim Gibbon today talk about the historical nature of the site. In fact, everybody's been talking about that. He sent in some documentation about potentially putting it onto the place, putting it onto the National Register of Historic Places. But I'd like to see if there's some analysis to put the site as perhaps a National Historic Landmark as opposed to the entire facility. And would there be any grant funding available from, say, a federal source? There's the National, or it's the Historic Preservation Fund. And coordinating with the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Officer, is there a way to get grant funding to put a marker out, a high quality marker that talks about the history of the site as a National Historic Landmark, preserving all the things that we're talking about, how important this was to the history of California and our community and the region. So a high quality marker as opposed to saving the entire building as an option. And I probably have some other ideas, but I think we'll start with that.
So as far as, thank you for your feedback. And as far as on the structure, that's what we need to do today, right? So the structure wise, let's do that analysis on like whatever the structure that we can save at cost effectively. And as I said, this whole place is bought, paying by community tax dollars, right? So this is a community's place, and it should be continue to be the same. And as far as my recommendation is that any organization that want to utilize that space, they should go through our Parks and Community Services guidelines, principles as per recommendation A and B, which is already approved by City Council. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, I'll tell you what's sort of driving my thought on all of this. It's not everything, but one of my priorities has been fiscal responsibility, and I am concerned. I know you're talking about decoupling the building from the park, or that money is, let's not talk about money. Let's not get wrapped up in money because the numbers are different and things like that. But I think money is important. I really do think we have to be fiscally responsible. We have a master plan. We have projects that have not been accomplished yet that we need to still accomplish. To spend additional money that we don't have right now, that we haven't set aside for a large scale renovation. Granted that the Nature Park Foundation has kindly offered to partner with the city, to get funding, but I still look at the operations and maintenance costs annually. I look at the long-term fix-up costs or renovation costs at 10 or 20 years. And those costs don't go away. Whether the Nature Park Foundation can raise the money in the near future or not, the city is still going to be holding the bill for the majority of that. And no level of programming that I can anticipate there would ever pay for all those ongoing maintenance costs. Or if it were to be able to pay for those maintenance costs, you'd have to have a level of programming that starts to take away from that serene nature park that we want, that quiet back, environment, the creek, the quietness and that sort of thing. So I am concerned about fiscal responsibility, and that's why I've kind of laid out some of the recommendations I had in terms of some more analysis, and about the only thing I've really asked you to do that I think maybe that you weren't really prepared to do is take a look at perhaps as you have in, I think it's recommendation, your potential alternatives to recommendation number 3, the second one that you listed, Kathy, retain the caretaker cottage, greenhouse, garages, and a small portion of Mud's restaurant building to create a community room. So that's, again, the fiscal analysis of a small portion of Mud's, a single building, perhaps, that might either preserve that historical nature or lend itself to be used for classes or other things.
So one thing is, like, as this is only about recommendation 3, whether the structure should be there or not, right? So in this case, I cannot really advise to go again because on that MOUs and all that, because already city staff spent a lot of time and energy in this. And as far as fiscal responsibility, I agree that. So in order to be fiscal responsible, we can allow any organization, any individual contributor. There are a lot of passionate people, right? So we keep hearing, so they can always contribute for this. And so first, let's get this fiscal analysis. And if it fits within our bill, then we can definitely look at it. But once again, going through that whole process of MOU and getting that's, I don't think that is, again, after 2 years, it took like, the whole thing took 2 years. So I don't want to repeat again 2 more years for this whole thing. So I want to focus on recommendation 3, which is requested by City Council. If we want to keep this structure, let's focus on that. Whatever fiscal analysis that we get information, which structure we can keep with most cost effective, let's go with it. And decouple all these organizations. They can always run their programs, use our facilities, like similar to what our San Ramon Community Center or any other place, right? So they can, based on the guidelines of our San Ramon Parks and Community Services. So that's my take. I don't want to go through this 2 years role once again.
Yeah.
Because already staff spent too much time and energy on this. And that's my take on this one. I want to stick to the recommendation what City Council is requested. That is whether we want to keep the structure or not. For me, my recommendation to the council is we will look at Rod or the city staff recommendation on which structure we can keep at most cost effective, and we will see if it fits in our bill. We will keep that, retain it, and demolish whichever we need to demolish. And then any user group can come and rent it, use it according to their requirements.
Yeah. Okay. I just, again, my main thing is I don't, though I do think it's one of the recommendations or possible alternatives that was listed from Kathy. I think we need to bring that back to the council. It's a potential to renovate the whole thing. I just don't see that really as a starter for me, but I think we'll leave it up to the full council to decide on that alternative. But I'd like to see that listed as we go forward.
We can add that also. So full structure, the cost for full structure, which we already know, right? Which is $4.3 million. That is already done. But if we want to bring it back to the council, that's fine. Then next thing is whatever the minimum structure that we can keep at most cost effective, that can fit within the city budget city bill or city budget, we'll take that option. And as far as, I don't see any good reason to have going back and spending 2 more years running through these MOUs and all those things. So for me, I want to focus on this recommendation 3. That's structure that we want to preserve as a city and keep it as a landmark for table to farm. I think we should just focus on that.
Yeah, again, but my point is that on the historical landmark, I could see doing that in a way where you put up a marker as opposed to having the buildings there, and where it can be with appropriate signage or appropriate a quality marker. You've seen these monuments out there as you're driving around the country, and people stop by them, and then it tells a story, and it recognizes the historical nature of that site, but it doesn't require a building to be there. Although I too would like to see an option for a single building cost, Kathy.
Okay, so if I might reiterate back, just because I want to make sure that we're clear. Staff would be going back to prepare some cost estimates of a smaller footprint of a renovation for just maybe one room in the building, as well as to make sure that we've encompassed the cost of the caretaker cottage, greenhouse, and those other facilities within that, so that we could come back with that. The only thing I'm a little unclear on, and I think I'm hearing you correctly, is you're not at this point necessarily interested in another presentation from the Nature Park Foundation, or are you? So I would like a little clarity, just so that we have clarity for them as well.
So as far as from council, the recommendation was only about the structure. If Nature Park Foundation, as far as I know, they should be able to run their programs because based on recommendation 1 and 2 that were made during our last council meeting were clear. So that is nothing to related with what we are doing today. Today we are doing only about the structure. That's the only thing they asked us to do. So that's why I don't want to bring that whole program, whole thing, programming and all that stuff once again back to the council. They asked us one single piece, that is whether we want to reconsider keeping the structure. So that's why I want to keep it to that. And as community said, they want to have this structure. We want to keep it. Let's go back to city council. This is my recommendation. I want to stick to that.
So if I hear you right, you're saying no need to give us, for the Nature Park Foundation, to have any additional time to make a special presentation before the council? Because
it's not going to be help in any way, right? So the recommendation 1 and recommendation 2 are already approved. That means any organization, it can be Nature Foundation or it can be any XYZ group, can always reach out to our Parks and Community Services, help our Parks and Community Services to run the programs. That's what it is already. The whole guidelines, procedures, process, everything is already in place. We don't need to define anything new here. This is already existing one. All city council asked us is, do you need, please? And nowhere I heard where it said bring back Nature Park Foundation or whether we should. So that's where this whole thing is becoming mess, and I feel like that is becoming more confusing.
Okay.
And I don't see any reason why Nature Park Foundation cannot run their program based on whatever the guidelines that council already approved, right? Recommendation A and B already approved from the council.
Okay, well, I'm okay with that, as opposed to giving a special presentation. Although I think we can probably expect to hear some public comment from members of the Nature Park Foundation. I would hope that their comments, when they come back to council, would incorporate the lower level of programming in whatever comments they have on how they would like to support the Crocanion Gardens going into the future.
Oh yeah, so it can be low, high, whatever the level they want to run. I don't have any problem with that. In fact, like I don't think our Parks and Community Services department have any issues, or Kathy, anybody have, no one have any issues. But only thing is, as council already approved recommendation A and B, they need to go with that direction. So in this meeting, I don't even have that part of my agenda today. All my agenda in this part of this meeting is just whether the structure should be there or not. And I think we both are agreeing on one thing, that we will do a physical analysis on if we want to keep one single structure, whichever structure we can preserve that as can be landmark, and we can keep it as a cost effective. That's what I think we are understanding. And another one piece, additional piece from you is if we can see even the other pieces like a caretaker cottage, greenhouse, and garages, if we can keep all those pieces, what will be the physical analysis? So I think that's the only the conversation that we can have in this meeting, as per city's guidelines, city council guidelines.
Okay, I think we're coming to an alignment here. I still would like to see some staff input on whether it's feasible to in place some kind of a historical marker if we, as a council, do not decide to go forward with a single building, and maybe the decision is to demolish everything, but that doesn't mean we couldn't still put in some kind of a historical marker to recognize the significance of the site in the past.
All right, so I think I've got that direction then to look into a historical marker, look into the costs associated with a partial building renovation. We already know the cost of the full building renovation, and also to encompass the outbuildings so that we've taken a look at those and the possibility of the restroom, et cetera. So that would be the scope of what we would bring back to the full council for consideration.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
If I may ask a question for city staff, would it be the desire of the committee to have it come back to the policy committee to go through the information that the staff puts together first before it goes back to the full council?
Yeah, that's a good idea. We can do that. I think that sounds good.
Okay. And it will, I know it'll take us a little bit to put that information together and do the analysis on the structures as well. So we will provide some sort of a timeline on that as to when we will be coming back to the policy committee.
Yeah, sure. And one more thing, Maria, before I forget, let's make sure we preserve whatever we have right now. I heard like there was some ceiling, there was some holes or something was made. So let's fix those things or cover with a tarp or something. Let's protect that building so we don't lose or damage much further than what already damaged for this structure.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
If I may ask one more clarifying question, are we looking at a renovation or a restoration, or just like a non-usable building, or is it a building that you would like access to for the public that has a drastic cost implication?
Yeah, so let's put two, if it is feasible, please put together both of them, because as Vice Chair Armstrong mentioned, we need to be fiscally responsible. I totally agree with it. And also it will give much more options for us. So let's put together both. And when I see that, I'm looking at envisioning like we have a landmark site where we in future, like not only us but our future future generations can go and say that, hey, this is where there were pioneers who started this farm to table and all that concept, right? So if it is even passive, like a museum where people can visit, and I'm sure we'll find a lot of community volunteers who can provide that knowledge base. So let's look into both of those.
My thought is, if we're gonna preserve a single building on the site, if that's the way the council wants to go, then I think it needs to be a practical facility. I mean, not just an empty shell. I mean, it be used as a classroom or be used for meetings or something, some kind of low level of programming. I don't know if that got your question, Rod. Is that what you were asking about?
That's correct. Just if it's going to be a practical, usable building, for example, if you have to have ADA upgrades or the parking lot associated with those improvements that is going to be used by the public, those costs will have to be added on versus just, like you said, a restoration for someone to kind of walk by and just look at and appreciate, versus a functional, usable structure.
I personally see, if you're going to go through all the effort of saving a portion of the MUDs in that alternative recommendation, then I say it needs to be a practical building. Otherwise, put a marker in.
Yeah. So if possible, please provide both. Let council look into it. Whichever makes sense, we can pick it during the council meeting then.
Okay.
So do we need to do any formal motion on this one, or?
I guess I would ask, does staff
Okay.
have any further questions, or do you have enough guidance or direction at this point on what to do and what to come back to us with?
I think we've answered most of our questions. Martin, you had mentioned at the beginning, potentially the need to make a motion. That was the one piece here. Do we need that?
There will be a motion necessary when it's time to refer this back up to the council, but at this point, we're merely continuing the same item to another date. Sounds like the only motion that we would need would be to continue the item for this policy committee, and it sounds like it's going to be a date uncertain. So we'll be renoticing this as appropriate.
That's
Okay. Thank you.
I'll move to continue the item to a future date to be determined.
I second that. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
On the motion to continue this item to a future date to return to policy, Chair Veros,
Yes.
Vice Chair Councilmember Armstrong,
Yes.
Perfect. 2-0 vote.
thank you.
Okay, let's go to item number 4, unfinished business, or sorry. Item number 6, policy committee comments. Vice Chair.
I've got no additional comments. Thank you.
Nothing from my side. Thank you very much. With this, we adjourn our call. Thank you everyone for joining and helping us with this call. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.